Constructive Criticism is sponsored by Oasis Games. MTGOasis.com is the place to get cards for your next Magic event. Try them out with code CCMTG for 15% off of your first order, and use the code WouldThatBeGood for 4% off of every order. Want to support the show directly? Head on over to patreon.com/CCMTG to check out some awesome benefits and future goals for the show. Thanks for listening, and here's this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructed Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructedCriticism.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 400 of Constructive Criticism. I'm your host, Spencer, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, a man who constantly bubbles. You might as well just call him Froakie, Mason Clark.
Did you say you might as well call me Croaky?
Froakie, but I like...
Oh, Froakie.
Froakie? I get it. The bubble frog Pokemon, Mason.
Yeah. He uses Bubble Beam.
The artifact dagger king himself, Ape Stein. If you're going to be shooting daggers like that, you might as well just put him in Hammer Time.
That new Kunai card says any target.
It's the Hammer Breaker. The Mirror Breaker. You shoot the Esper Sentinel.
So we have a lot to talk about today. It's episode 400, and today's topic is always be improving, which, by the way, huge shout out to Abe when we were talking about, like, what do we want to do for episode 400? I'm pretty sure that it's probably what we did for episode 200, but...
And 300.
Is that true?
Yeah, the episode 300 has a different spin, but it is a very similar idea. I went back and listened to some of it.
I also went back and listened to episode 300, and I didn't remember that.
It's not verbatim, but I think it's very similar. I mean, it's not a bad thing. Like, I think different context on similar ideas is a good idea.
I'm going on the record right now and saying it.
Abe's like, I know we like to pre-plan the show, Spencer. You just put that on the calendar for 2024. I'll see you there.
Spencer's a big fan of the pre-plans. But today we're going to be talking about always be improving and kind of both the origins of what it means to be always improving and where it came from and kind of what we've learned from it. We're also going to talk about something much bigger than always improving, guys. It's bigger than us. The fun fact, Magic is bigger than the Constructive Criticism podcast. Mason's like, no. They're both like, no.
Don't gaslight me like that.
But something big happened today. It's really funny because I think literally on either mic checks for the patrons or the podcast last week, I literally said, I really wish this had happened. We got a ban and restricted announcement today. Abe, why don't you tell us what that announcement was?
The big ones, a single card, the same card, being banned in both Modern and Pioneer, and that is Lurrus of the Dream Den, the most notable offender of all of the companions from Ikoria. Too naturally aligned with the deck building incentives of putting as many cheap cards in your deck as possible. So, impossible to see this one coming. Apparently it was played in like 30% of Modern decks that made it to 4 wins after 4 matches in Moto Leagues, and like 20% of Pioneer decks. I personally think that in Pioneer it probably would have been fine to stay for another couple years, but it's better to just cut ties with it now because it will just get to that point.
I think the ban of Pioneer makes a lot of sense for the way the community talks about it. They're like, it's funny because I hear a lot of people say what you're saying, which I think maybe from a gameplay perspective is true. But like people are like, just ban all the companions. And they're like, hey, we know Lurrus is going to get broken. This is a forever format. There will be enough 1 and 2 mana things that we know we're going to have to ban this, so we're going to do it now. I didn't mean it for Pioneer. I meant for Modern.
I mean it for Pioneer. I just want to see all of them gone. It just feels weird being in this broken state where it's like, okay, I guess I'll go to breaking the next companion until they're like, I guess this one needs to go too. It's just weird to me to feel like that's the way the format is. The way the format is right now, kind of, Lurrus was holding up a couple of good archetypes that were like keeping a good amount of balance, the same way that you could argue that Lurrus was holding up a good amount of balance with some of the other Modern Horizons 2 cards in Modern, with like people not necessarily being able to play Murktide Region all the time, or not always being able to play Solitude or Fury in their decks for free, kind of having to make a decision on those lines, leading to what was a good and fun format for a while. It's kind of like a similar thing, but on a much lesser degree with the kind of cards you play in Pioneer, but that is to be seen.
The other bans were Galvanic Relay and Disciple of the Vault and Pauper, as well as Expedition Map getting unbanned. I think it was either last week or the week before we actually talked about kind of the Pauper decks that were showing up with Experimental Synthesizer.
I don't know. I'm not really surprised to see any of these bans. I think that Synthesizer made both of these cards too good. I also really like the unbanning of Expedition Map after they really went after Tron in the last banning. You can also listen to the Common Knowledge podcast to hear about this. But I want to quickly touch on what we each think about this, because you guys kind of talked about it a little bit, but like, I'm pretty happy with the banning of Lurrus in Modern. Personally, like, all of the Modern that I've played in the last, since I started playing Modern again, 100% of it were Lurrus decks. Whether it was Hammer Time or GSD or GDS. It's just what I've played. And the Twitter community in Magic was like, this doesn't make your expensive cards good anymore. And it's like, yeah, but it makes your decks kind of cooler in a lot of different ways. Like, the fact that I now get to decide if I want to play Gurmag Angler or Murktide Region, or like, if Street Wraith is worth it. There's lots of things that can change how you build your decks. As part of that, it means that Stubborn Denial opens up a lot more if you want that to be kind of your avenue, depending on how you build your deck, stuff like that. While the point being made that, yes, this does not make Bloodbraid Elf better in Jund, and it's possible that, like, low-to-the-ground Jund decks are still better than, like, more mid-rangey Jund decks, overall, this is a good banning for the format, because it opens up the types of cards that I get to look at when building my decks.
It's, like, really important, and Carmen Handy has mentioned this when it comes to cubing. It's important to, like, have dreams or whatever, and to have aspirational things in a cube. And I think the same thing is true in Magic. And I think sometimes we see bannings like this that I think are good, and B, like, we have, like, people who come around and they're like, oh, like, your Bloodbraid Elf isn't good now. But, like, people feel like they can, like, have that conversation and think about that, and that is a big part of Magic to a lot of people. It's kind of everything up to into the tournament, picking your cards and stuff like that. And while, yeah, Bloodbraid Elf's probably not it, there have been a lot of really powerful 3-drops that we have see play during Lurrus, which is a scary thing. Think about the fact that there are cards that are actually, like, not as good as Lurrus, but, like, they have swung the needle enough times and shown up, like Chandra Dressed to Kill, Seasoned Pyromancer, totally different types of cards than Lurrus. But Lurrus makes it is so much better, and so much clearly better than that it ends the conversation. It makes it a lot less fun. I really liked a lot of the Lurrus gameplay and stuff like that, but it was, like, really taxing, to, like, always have to play against Lurrus and whatever and have that happen. And it's going to be cool. Like, is, like, Liliana the Last Hope? Is that the one from Eldrazi at -2/-1s? Ignoble Hierarch into that is a play pattern we've never seen before, and that's, like, a Ren and 6 type play pattern against other monkey decks.
Jund is a good example of this. I really like how you've brought up, like, those cards. This opens up different things. I don't know. I was pretty disappointed in Magic Twitter today, so I should probably shut up, because I was just like, you guys are just being mean.
I've played a lot of Shadow recently. I played it in the NRD this last weekend. I was planning to play it in more events coming up. I think the reason it was so good was it was a proactive deck that could legitimately take the control role, like almost like a hard control deck in a lot of matchups. Like, I played 1 EE this last weekend, but I played 2 before that, and I was very easily, like, looping Dress Down EEs, and just, like, because Lurrus also pushed the format down, EE for 2 and 1 is all you really needed, and you just would take over these games. And so Shadow, I think, gets to become, like, a cool tempo deck again, and I think it's still good, which I kind of like. By banning Lurrus, all the decks, I think, are still playable. They all just get a little worse, and they open up some cool new ways to play them.
I really like...
And we don't have to play with Dress Down forever anymore, which I love. That's all I'm going to say. I hate Dress Down. It's so boring.
Well, I think for what it's worth, I don't know that their Dress Down will even disappear. I just think it becomes more of a toolboxy card instead of, like, a annoyance, if that makes sense.
I'm a little tired. I meant to say Dress Down forever, like EOT Dress Down.
Got it.
And then it stays, and then you do it again.
Yeah.
And I played a lot of games where I was like, yeah, opponent, you can literally never win. Like, I watched this happen to a Humans player. It's like, your deck doesn't work anymore. I have these huge shadows. I'm going to abyss you every turn and draw 2 cards.
It's
You will
humility,
die.
but it's one-sided.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like,
And I'm
not
drawing 2 cards a
playable.
turn.
Yeah, I had a moment with EE where that happened when I was playing this deck, kind of like what you were saying, where, like, I'm going to EE a lot here, and you need to probably concede. I think that the thing that I wanted to touch on that we kind of haven't gotten to yet is what I would rather them just ban all the companions in older formats. Like, just admit you made the mistake. They're all going to get broken.
Did y'all see the work I did on Obosh today?
I did see the work
My
that you did on
innovations.
Obosh. I like both of your tweets today. The, like, we're gonna put ourselves, we're just gonna literally take out one companion, put in the other one from Mason,
Oh yeah, Giganta and GDS. Yeah, you lose Torok, but that's it.
Yeah.
No, you can still play Turok. No, you can.
Yeah.
It's on the black.
It only costs one. It only costs one black on the front side.
So it's one black and then black to kick. You're in there, dude.
But to Abe, your tweet, like, Antian companions, I kind of agree. I think that, like, they're just unreasonable mechanics that we shouldn't have.
I think just with the way they are, they're just so unhealthy for Magic.
Abe, can I throw in the London mold there with you for the third hand and the handshake?
Oh man, could you? I think that all of the gameplay homogenization things. I mean, Annie's completely different. Annie's like a relic of like 22 years ago, 28 years. 94 is when Magic came out. It was happening then, and it hasn't happened since. The reward so heavily outweighs the cost, and especially when the cost is just like, or is like too well aligned, like Luris was with things being good, or is not enough of a cost, like with Yorion, where you just play a bunch of good cards that get you through your deck enough and churn, and you just like win on raw card advantage, or like when the deck building costs for like Giganta is like, I can't play double colored spells. My mana already probably doesn't want to play double colored spells in a format that's that big. So it's just, all of them are such a big problem and just do so much to make the game about them and a like deck building process about them. And instead of introducing a reward for doing one of these things, all of those designs introduce a parameter under which you have to build your deck because the advantage is so high. You need to capture it, and it's just too much.
I think about the green white one a lot. The I don't remember the name of it.
Hero the Orphan Guard.
There's like, oh yeah, this is free. It's kind of annoying. I think that like the blue-red otter one would get to that point. Like if they just started banning companions one after another, eventually people would just be like, okay, well, like I can have to make these two concessions and then I get an 8th card.
I mean, there are ones where it's like really high. Like I think like Karuga, where you have to play like things that all cost 3 or more. Like all of your spells have to have mana value 3 or more. That one's pretty rough.
Zerda.
Dude, Karuga was a fun standard deck for what it's worth. That was a hot time.
The ones that are like super high cost, I guess, could stay, but like the whole mechanic has just caused nothing but problems. Luris is definitely the first step towards undoing that, but I think that, we'll see Yorion and like Kihira become staples wherever they can exist. Obosh become a staple wherever it can exist, and then slowly be like, well, I guess these decks are just a little bit better than the other decks because they have this thing going on.
They read the narrative. They're smart. They know how these things kind of work, right? They figured it out for Luris. I'm sure the people at Play Design and in charge of this can figure out the other stuff. Because to me, what today read as, we have more companions coming. That's what it read to me. It was like, hey, Luris is the really messed up one. We have more coming, so we're not getting rid of the mechanic.
I didn't read that in that at all. And if there are more companions coming, I don't want to say that like my confidence in the future of Magic will dwindle, because I am always superbly confident in the future of Magic, but I think that it would be incredibly tone deaf, and it would have me asking questions about people that I really respect about what they're seeing that I'm not. The response to that would be so absolutely negative from the community after how we've all seemed to feel, especially on the competitive side, about them. I could see them coming in something like 5 years, 10 years down the line, that we revisit this mechanic and do it again with more development time, more testing behind the ideas. But it clearly, we shot like from the hip way too hard here, and this like has missed the mark. And I would hope they're not just gung-ho with bringing them right back, because I think that would be like a huge flop for a bunch of people. I think that's something that would make people quit Magic. Me personally, I wouldn't, but I think that's something that would make lots of people not want to play Magic anymore.
Speaking of the theory of fire, let's go into our hot main topic, which is always be improving. First of all, I want to give a couple shout outs really quick before we go into this. The first one I want to give is Mason. Dude, you doing okay?
I'm hanging in.
Mason's doing this show, guys, on an amount of sleep that would knock me out for multiple days, for what it's worth. I actually can't function on what Mason is doing right now, so I just want to give Mason a huge shout out.
In a non-functional way that lets me function right now.
I guess. I made a post. Somebody called a novel, by the way. I need to get your guys' feedback live on the podcast. Was that post too long?
No.
Mason's like, yeah, it
Not
was.
for the amount of time that you've put into the show, but it was a bit of a chunker.
What?
I also tried to look in WordPress for the word count, but like
I got you.
80% of the words are literally names of patrons.
It was not as long as a Star City Select article, and I wrote those every week.
How grateful I am for everyone who's ever given feedback to the podcast, everybody who's ever kind of done like all of that stuff. Just every listener, every patron, every co-host. Like, people used to give me crap like, Spencer can't keep a co-host. And then you like look at everyone other than LSV on like Limited Resources, you're like, you know what? It's actually just hard to do 400 episodes of a podcast. What I think is even cooler for this show is just evolving and having a vision for like a goal that's really cool for, I think, myself, and I think Abe and Mason too, is we're 400 episodes in, but like our goal is to just help you improve at Magic. Not just because we think we're smarter, because I don't think that's what it is. I think it's like we're sharing what we learn as we learn it, because we wish somebody had done that for us as we were getting better. That's always been the goal of the show, and it was really cool to kind of see a lot of that stuff. I wanted to read something that was sent to me. I got a couple things sent to me, but I thought this one stood out to me a lot, and so I really wanted to highlight it. And it's from Adrian. Adrian is one of our longest listeners, longest patrons, and I have a lot of love for Adrian. I think he's a super cool dude. But he says, I was decently close-minded when I started listening to the podcast. I didn't like to be wrong or look stupid. Dude, me either. That was me when I started the podcast. So not only was it you when you started listening, but it was me when I started it. He says, though I still struggle with this from time to time, though not as bad. CCMTG helped me to embrace always improving in Magic and in life. I think it's the biggest boon to the show. This one time, I get this message from this kid, like, small child. His name was Mason Clark.
I'm like 25 in this story, I think.
I'm pretty sure you were 17.
Yes, yeah, I'm turning 29 in 2 days. Meanwhile,
I can't believe how long the podcast has been going.
So true, bestie. Man, my gray hairs.
When did you build a time machine, Mason? When did it happen?
Dude,
It's during COVID.
Eder, you have that out of the laughs and stuff. There was legitimately a time in my life in which I believed that Mason Clark was not a real human being.
This is a true statement.
Like, straight up.
Dude, some days I don't even believe he's real, and I hang out with him all the time.
Did not believe Mason Clark was a real human being. It was like a total... And I kept the joke going until I met him. I get this message from this kid Mason. SOV Mason, really, for what it's worth. I mean, it would change the trajectory of, like, the show. It changed what we were doing. And I want to take a moment to kind of talk about where hashtag always improving comes from. It might have been the second year of the show. So after episode, I don't know. It was right after I qualified for the Pro Tour. I got this job at a startup called Thumbtack. And they had two really big pillars, building pillars in which you build your company on, because it builds the culture. And I think that, like, in a lot of ways, I like to treat the podcast like a startup and be lean and, like, try and figure out ways to optimize things. But the two things that Thumbtack was really big on was, number one, treat every day like day one. To think about the first day at any new job where you're trying to soak in everything that you can and learn as much as you can and be as attentive as possible, and to make that be your attitude for as long as you work at that startup. And I really loved that one, and I still use it today in my workplace. Like, I still always have ideas that are coming from other people and stuff. But the other one that they had was always be improving. And the funny thing about the culture at Thumbtack, but they would do that, like hashtag always be improving. And I straight up stole it. The mindset of being always improving was already what we were talking about on the show. I mean, when you look at kind of how the show started, we have this horrible episode 1, episode 2, episode 3. And by episode 5, we kind of started to get this idea of, like, what are we trying to accomplish? Because the reason that the CCMTG was started was because we were going to PTQs. There wasn't like a podcast for PTQ players. There were like a bunch of standard podcasts, but there weren't podcasts dedicated to, like, okay, you're going to your local PTQ this weekend. What are the top decks in the current PTQ format? That used to be a thing. You used to have seasons. And so CCMTG originally was like talking about the things for the season, and then eventually, all right, we're going to do a format deep dive of some kind, either talking about an individual deck or talk about something like that. And then we're going to talk about, something that's going to help you improve at Magic. and things that we've learned along the way. And, in year 2, Always Improving comes along and takes over the identity of the show because it fits in so well. And we realized pretty quickly from the absolute explosion of the show, COVID hit this show just like it did many podcasts pretty hard, but like year 2, 3, and 4 of CCMTG just exploded. And this mindset of like, I can be better tomorrow than I am today, I can do more, it changed the trajectory of the show and kind of what we were trying to be. And we realized pretty quickly that it went beyond Magic because listeners were telling us, I just got this job and I talked about hashtag Always Improving and doing it. I just bought my first house and I used the things that you said on the podcast to save money. Like, these stories were coming in to this Magic the Gathering show, and it was pretty unreal. I want to take a step back and like kind of talk about what Always Improving has meant to everybody. And I want to start with you, Mason. Like, you obviously identified pretty well with it as a listener, so I wanted to reach out to you first.
When Spencer mentioned like getting better at Magic, there was nothing like that when he first started, right? And it's an interesting experience because it's a thing that I sympathize with, but not with Magic. Because when I started playing Magic was about 4 years ago now. I have not been playing Magic for that long, all things considered. I felt it when I was like much younger, 11 or 12, 13, and I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And I would go to my locals every weekend. I went to the Saturday and the Sunday tournament almost every single week. No one tried to help me. There was no real way to learn stuff. I remember reading, if you used to play Yu-Gi-Oh!, remember, they had like blogs on it and stuff, and I would read it, but I couldn't quite get it. Part of that's like, being a kid who doesn't understand some of the ideas they're trying to say, and part of that's like being a kid with dyslexia and trying to comprehend all these big, long writing things. But like, there was nothing kind of like this. And so I stopped playing card games for a while. In high school, got back into it after high school, played a different card game a bunch, and then jumped into Magic. And I had stuff like this, but it was something that I had done for the other card game, which is Card Fight Vanguard, and I had done a lot of content, and I had started there. And it's funny, I didn't know about CC, and I think we would have actually started up around the same time, which I don't know if we've ever actually talked before, Spencer, but the YouTube channel would have started around the time CC did, maybe a month or two after. It was very much focused on like improving, and something I'll tell everyone if you talk to me at a tournament or whatever, and talk about how bad a tournament is. All we can do is kind of, play the best Magic we can and improve from there, right? And like when you go to the tournament, the wins and the losses, it feels like it matters in the moment. And yeah, when you go to the tournament, you want to do well, you want to get a bunch of wins. But what actually matters is playing well, right? And like over a long enough tournaments, that's going to pay off, and you're going to improve and have a lot more fun playing Magic as you win more.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Because I think you said something that might lose the listeners. Mason had a YouTube channel called SOV Mason.
It was called The Science of Vanguard.
The Science of Vanguard. Sorry.
And then there were other people on the channel with me.
You didn't say that when you said the YouTube channel.
Yeah,
it was like confusing.
Yeah, the reason my YouTube channel, if you look at the Magic one, has so many subscribers but not many views, it's because I just turned it over and I deleted all the Vanguard videos. I had done that sort of thing and been there and kind of done that, and it was so much about like just doing better and always improving. And so when I started to want to play Magic seriously and like try and compete and do that sort of thing, wanted to reach out and find content, found another podcast, I think it was the Spike Feed that Spencer guested on, and from there,
let's go.
That's how I found CC. I think I guess I remember y'all talking about that too.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Yeah, go listen to that one." And I knew the term spike, and I was like, okay, and went to this one and listened to it, and it was very similar to like the kind of stuff we talked about. And then, like Spencer said, I reached out because I had a little bit of experience in some of the stuff that seemed like they were having issues with, and now I'm here. But like always improving to me is really important because my life, I've played a lot of card games and I've like worked on a lot of things and try to get there. And I don't look at things in the short term, and I like to look at things in the past, and I like to think about when Magic's over for me, or when Magic's over, I want to be able to look back happily and fondly on the memories and know that I tried well and did all these sort of things. Because I have an experience like that already. I played another card game. I was very, very good at it. Did really well, and I'm very happy and fond about my experience with that. And now I'm creating new memories and doing this new thing. And there's other things like that in high school too. And I have a bunch of regrets about other stuff in life and things along those lines. And so always improving to me, it's more of like a lifestyle and a way of like defaulting to things. And I think it's why it connects so much with me, because it's like I'm always working to do slightly better and improve and iterate. If I can't have a conversation with someone, I have to jam my head into the wall, and I have to get slightly better. So if I can't find someone to talk to me about something, it becomes very challenging to learn. So I have to figure it out on my own and slowly improve. And
somebody straight up told me that we were a cult a couple of times.
You don't make it till you get haters, and being called a cult's a big hater.
This mental shift was a pretty big deal for me. When you have 6 kids in your family, right, and you're all competitive, it is not always the best environment to grow up in sometimes. And I think a lot of my siblings feel like they never got heard, and you feel like you have to compete for attention and for all kinds of stuff. And then also, I was not taught critical thinking as a kid, and it was something that I had to learn growing up. And in all honesty, Magic has probably taught me more in my life than anything else. Using Magic as kind of that catalyst to learn a lot of things. I had a pretty important job interview last week, and one of the things that they asked me is what is your greatest accomplishment in your life? And I started sobbing. I didn't know that I was going to, because I actually knew they were going to ask the question. I got sent the questions beforehand for the interview, but that was one of the questions. It's what's your greatest accomplishment? And I already knew what my answer was going to be. It was going to be recording this episode today. And I just broke down and started crying. I think, to me, always improving just means that you understand that you're not perfect, that you're not always right. You're not going to be always right. Fun fact, just like life, Magic's really freaking hard. Your goal is not to be perfect at your tournament. Your goal is to be the best you. And those are really different things. There are a lot of games of Magic that I've played that I thought I played a perfect game of Magic, where I'm sure if I went back and watched the tape, I'd be like, you're a dummy dum-dum. If you ever want to get into Super Smash Bros., Ultimate will just let you save your replays. And the number of times where I was like, this is the best game of Smash I've ever played, save the replay, went to watch it before sending it to Mason or Matt or whatever, and gone, I played like a freaking weirdo. I am sure that we all have those moments in Magic. And always improving is about overcoming those moments. Or maybe it's more about having the moments, right? Where you feel that. Where you feel like you did something great. To be always improving and to always be improving is about realizing that you're not perfect and kind of moving forward.
I said it during the mic checks, but I've been playing Magic for 13 years, which is literally half my life. I'm 26. I've been playing Magic since I was 13. When I started playing Magic tournaments when I was 17, my mom would always say oh, good luck, and get me out the door to go get in the car with my friends who were in college and had a car and would drive to the tournaments. And one day, I don't even remember what possessed me to do this, other than maybe a handful of Star City articles I'd read during class when I should have been doing other things, paying attention in class. But I was stop wishing me good luck, just tell me to play well. To the point where I just always have had this huge hunger to be as good a Magic player as I can be. This is something that I've really devoted myself to. And I can see Mason laughing because it's the most me story, right? That 17-year-old me is Mom, I don't want to be lucky, I want to be good.
Mom, it's not a phase. I'm trying to get my micro down.
And here I am.
I got the picture and I come with you, dear.
But when it comes to always improving and the podcast, the first episode I came on here was setting goals in Magic.
Top 10 CCMTG episode. We might be able to send you the text thread between me and Mason after that episode. Legitimately top 10.
The way I prepared for that, being on a Magic podcast first time, being on CC, I didn't really know much about CC. I don't really listen to a lot of Magic podcasts. It's not really how I took in most of my information. Usually a reader guy. Hence why I have a blog instead of my own podcast or whatever. Love it here. But I went and listened back to a bunch of episodes that Mason and Meebo had done before me, and listen to, just get a feel of okay, what am I walking into? And at the start of every episode, there was this segment, always improving. And I was this is such a difference maker in what I see myself wanting to do if I were to do Magic content. And I just love everything about it and the idea behind it, to the point where when Mason asked me after that if I wanted to make it a regular thing, I was already super down, because all of the fear I might have had about is it going to be I'm going to have to play, is it going to be back to how I felt about kind of writing sometimes, where I'd be I'm just going to have to keep up with all these formats and then kind of dispense information about them. Kind of for me, as someone who is entering this environment, made me feel super at home is something that was already such a part of my approach to Magic, of just always trying to be the best Magic player I can be on any given day, on any given turn, in any given match, you know? And, you know, there's nowhere in my life that I think that approach that really has stemmed from, you know, me growing up and playing a bunch of Magic hasn't touched a part of my life. And I'm not surprised that so many viewers feel the same way, because it really is like such a big cornerstone of the show. Like, it just instantly clicked with me. I don't even know what to say about it. It was just so perfect, and it's probably the reason that I was like so excited to get on. Why, I don't know, I love doing an episode every week. So
I mean, I pay you the literal largest compliment I could pay you right now, Abe. The amount that you remind me sometimes when we podcast of Michael is unbelievable. You just remind me of him a lot, as far as like your really laid back approach to a thing that you're really passionate about. You come across so like reserved when I can tell inside you're like really excited about something. It's really interesting.
Is it the way that I'm also like able to tell my mom to stop wishing me good luck? I don't know.
Yeah, that is something Michael
That's
would. That is something that the Hinder father would say to his mom.
Mama Hinder father.
No one of my family has ever asked me about a Magic tournament for me. It's really cool when I hear other people's stories about that. I want to talk about really quickly about like what changed that you didn't expect.
I'll do a life one, since we do so many episodes about not life. If you listen to this podcast regularly, or you follow me on social media, or you've seen me stream, or you've interacted with me at a tournament, you might think that I never showed up, and you'd be right. But that wasn't always the case. Back when I was, actually until about 13, 14, I actually just had no friends. And I didn't talk to anyone, and I probably have said more words on this podcast than I did for my entirety of school outside of answering questions when called upon. And that, up to that point, which would be a sophomore in high school. And I struggle with pretty bad and extreme anxiety, especially social anxiety, at almost all points in life. And a form of improving that's kind of happened from that is tackling it and dealing with that, where part of it was the good people at Lexapro helping out a little bit, but also theater class was really big. And the idea that like figuring out that like, hey, other people are feeling similar thoughts to you, you're just having them more extremely. Other kids feel this way, and like practicing talking in public and speaking and that sort of thing is not a thing that came easily to me. It was never a skill I naturally had. And since then, I think I've gotten pretty good at relating and talking and sympathizing and interacting with people and talking and doing this whole sort of rigmarole. And that's a pretty big difference. And I mean, I guess at this point, 2/3 of my life I've been a talker and 1/3 I haven't, with my birthday being in 2 days. Because I'd be about 13 or 14-ish, so.
I remember learning about you being a theater kid and like me being like, dude, I was a theater kid too.
It's also, calling me a theater kid is aggressive. I took theater class, and then I took it again senior year because I had all my credits done except one, and I retook theater. And in fact, during my evolution of becoming a talker, I was in a computer class that was pointless. And so I decided I'd rather do theater, which was pointless. And so I walked into theater class and told my teacher that I had fixed it with the principal and not to worry. And then I walked to the principal the next day and said, don't worry, I took care of it with my other teachers. We're good. And I swapped my schedule around.
My senior high school, I did FFA for a full day every other day. Student teaching or whatever it was called for the theater teacher, then theater was that day, and then the other day was like basic non-electives, and then stage crew. So I knew it was a stage crew guy.
It is. If you're a high schooler, right? I mean, they're probably not doing high school productions. If you ever need to give advice to a high schooler and you want them to be happier, tell them to go do stage crew for their theater company.
For their elective. It's actually
because
unreal.
You will get all of the whatever time you get for the production going on to not be in class because you have to work on stage crew stuff. You'll hang out with all your friends during that whole time, and you'll have to do no actual work.
At least 4 to 5 people in stage crew class had to do actual work.
Yeah, you won't be one of them. Don't worry about it.
And then everybody else, if asked to do something, should do it for the people. I mean, like, if one of those 5 people is like, hey, can you help me with this thing? You should do it.
Yeah, you have to move around some wood or some furniture.
Y'all's school experience is so different than mine. That was not the case at my school at all. It was not. It was an after school only thing for stage crew.
Oh no!
So you're not during school hours.
I got 4 elective full credits from stage crew.
I
in high
signed
school
up on a list to be on stage crew in my freshman year because, like a friend of mine was doing it in the grade above me. I didn't do anything up until 2 weeks before the play happened.
We had a musical, a play, Shakespearean festival.
I got 2 days off of class because I signed a clipboard, and all I had to do was stand backstage on like 2 nights out of one of my weeks.
We actually had 2 plays my junior and senior. Anyway, we're going the deepest of cuts for episode 400. For what it's worth, though, speaking of always improving in stage crew, if you ever want to play with like $2,000+ equipment and learn sound design or like learn lighting or something, that actually is like an always improving class that you can take in high school. Like, it's actually unreal.
If you're like a junior or senior in high school, you can pretty legitimately network with the people who are like actually in charge of the equipment, and like are because they you and learn from them and like get their business card and talk to them about maybe like a little bit of apprenticeship situation. There's a lot of opportunity there.
If you listen to a podcast, you might be into audios. Abe, what is a moment in your life other than stage crew that like you kind of didn't expect, or MTG for what it's worth, that you kind of didn't expect to be improving at?
I'm kind of similar to Mason in the sense that I was like not really a talker for a long time. I had some friends, more friends than Mason because I'm more popular, of course.
Well, I had 0, so mother, like, you know, it was pretty easy.
Speaking of bigger number, better person, let's check the work on this one.
I like graduated high school and went to community college. Kind of just like through my time in community college, I was still like a very like mostly just nervous, shy, reserved, awkward person. Almost exactly like Mason. Not in the same way where it's like I became a talker, but like I found a lot of grounds through learning how to improve and meeting people who facilitated me improving and were willing to help me out and were willing to like engage with me. A lot of confidence that I still carry with me like today. I don't think there's like a single thing that I've ever approached that I felt uncomfortable with since like, I guess I was like 18 and was doing that like I haven't been able to remind myself like, you know, if I'm failing or I'm struggling, that it is like just my first attempt or I'm still early in the process of learning. That it's something I'm working on improving at and that like I can grow at and become better at. There's not anything that is an obstacle for me these days that like I can't take a step back from and remind myself of just the reality in kind of a humbling way that like, you know, there are tons of things I'm going to be bad at and there are tons of things that are going to stress me out or be difficult. But as long as I'm trying to improve at them and I'm using an informed process to try to get better at these things I need to or want to get better at, really kind of made it easier for me to feel in the way that you were saying before, where like I'm kind of like really reserved about something I'm passionate about. It's like just a lot of understanding and like trust in this process of just one foot in front of the other, just getting closer and closer to being over an obstacle. And that mindset really just does permeate through everything in my life, all of the challenges I face, all of the small things and the big things. It's amazing how much like a good relationship with a process can change everything else in your life. Because if you understand and have a good process for one thing and you're able to think laterally about it to move it to another thing, or even just to understand that those two things might be similar enough that there's some overlap, for me, it just really gave me a sense of confidence that I didn't have at any other point in my life. I don't think I would have landed like the job that I landed. I don't think I would have, you know, been able to make it through like the degree I earned at college. There's so many things I would not have been able to make it through if not for achievements and approach through improving at Magic, and what that has really like taught me and had me grow through on many levels that seem completely trivial to anyone as an outsider.
I don't think anything you just said was trivial. I think it's actually a pretty huge deal. And I'm going to build on top of it because I think that yours is really closely aligned to mine in a lot of different ways. Despite what you might think listening to this show, I think that one of my biggest changes that I didn't expect from this show is kind of learning, because of always improving, I've become a process-oriented, results-driven person. So I adjust my process to get the results that I want. I think that people see that a lot in the content that I create, whether it's hashtag Quest for 10, whether it's the Constructed Clash series that hopefully we'll be starting again soon. Wink, wink. Understanding like that I can be results driven without being married to an individual thing, or being process oriented while being results driven. It's changed my life in a lot of different ways. I got the job at that startup that we mentioned at the beginning of the show because of this podcast. Like straight up, a podcast listener was my reference for the job. It doubled my income, got promoted because of this always improving mentality. I then wouldn't have gotten my job in software without working for a startup. My company that I worked for, Thumbtack, had a rule, like you had to meet a 95% CSAT score, which for those who don't know is a customer satisfaction rating. Their goal is to have the best customer service in the world as a startup, and they achieved it. I actually used Magic a lot to help me with that. So if I'm going to see this company and I'm going to get promoted, I want to be the best at the thing that I'm doing. And the way that you did that is you had to be above that, right? So like if 95% is the goal, it means that, or 1 in 20 calls can be rough for me as a person that's on the phones for this startup. And I had a 98% customer satisfaction rating. Got moved to the engagement team. And I looked at the person who was the best on the engagement team. And I walked up to her and I said, like, I'm going to be better than you. And she's like, no, you're not. And so like we would compete, like I would go into work and compete with her every day. And 100% of this came from Magic, wanting to do better tomorrow. And if she beat me one day, I'd be like, that's fine. I'm going to get 5 more internal sales tomorrow. If we helped 5 clients, I'm going to get helped 10 tomorrow. It 100% came from the listener support telling me that what I was doing and what I was teaching on the show made things better. If you had asked me when I started the show, if the biggest interview of my life would be happening literally tomorrow and what it would be for, I would say that you were out of your freaking mind. The show and this mindset has changed me to be that process-oriented, results-driven person. I want to talk really quickly about how we think it's helped the show, and I'm going to go first. Always Improving is the thing that made it through every iteration of every co-host. Everyone identified with it, whether it was Seth and John, Allie and Mason, Allie and Abe, Trey, Mason, Spencer, all of the other Spencer iterations. Everyone identified with this idea. I knew that the core value of what you guys were trying to achieve was the same thing that I wanted to achieve.
I kind of said it when I was ranting a bit about how great I thought it was and how much it really resonated with me, but something that kind of makes me feel reserved, even when I was sharing like my written content or any amount of Magic content that I make, is this fear that I'm going to like write something or put out something that's not going to have any longevity. I'm going to spend this time to make a list of 3 decks you can play in Standard tomorrow.
This week on Card Kingdom.
Yeah, and then you know what? 2 months from now, there's not going to be a reason for someone to want to go back and read that. And so, as much as that might provide value for the people who read it immediately, it's not something that really captures my attention or my interest when it comes to like putting an effort. And that was kind of like why I never got back into writing that much after I left Star City Select, is that I didn't really feel like there was another place where I could be writing something where I could give a longevity to the piece, gave some the listener a takeaway that was bigger than was necessarily being discussed. And this existing on every single episode makes every episode by default timeless to me. There's not a single episode of the show where you can't have something to take away, even if you go back and listen to our modern episode from like right after Modern Horizon comes out. All those things we said basically don't mean anything. With like Luris being gone, with how wrong we were, with like months of time passing. But we did improve that week. You know, we did share what we did to improve that week, and we did share all of our thought processes and everything. And all of that combined really makes it so that the show is more than just a, you better listen this week. It's a, catch the episodes, catch up on it, listen back, find a topic you like. Even if it's not the most recent or current, there's always a nugget of wisdom in there. We're always trying to put something in there that, you know, anyone can learn from or take away from or relate to. And that is like just so, something that I think really sets it apart and makes me feel so lucky to be a part of the show more than any other Magic show I could be on. So
you are gonna make me cry.
I worried about that today when I was like,
I'm gonna cry. I will cry for what it's worth. I'm a huge crier. You guys have done podcast meetings with me, and like I'm not as strict about them as I used to be, because I think that kind of structure scares people away from me, even though like it's how I think. Like, but part of our podcast meeting, we did 2 things back in the day. One of them was the way that we do it right now, like where we planned out our next 8 weeks or so. We looked at all the PTQ seasons, the events and stuff, and then we planned our shows. And one of the things that came up that we did in the podcast meetings But like one of the things that we talked about is like we wanted one timeless episode every so often. I think at the time we were trying to do 6 weeks at a time. So in those 6 weeks, we wanted them. We used to do our podcast meetings as lunches, like lunch meetings at a place. And I actually remember the time that we were at a Buffalo Wild Wings because it was Casey's pick for where we would eat. And he wants some B-dubs. One of the other things that we talked about was like we did a brainstorming session where we would just pitch training grounds to each other and then talk about what they would mean, write them down. It was really fun and like really helped the show. But the timeless things, like, okay, like let's pitch 5 timeless episodes and then stack rank them as to like how we feel like we could do them and stuff like that. And so the fact that just the idea of the segment felt timeless to you, it means a lot to me.
I think the big one for me that I think about when it comes to the show is a little bit of a dagger at Magic players in the tournaments. But have you ever been at a tournament and someone had a bad tournament and they just like lose it?
Oh, only
like,
every
blah, 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 blah. Yeah, like it happens every tournament, right? There's someone who's like loses it, they get really mad, they don't want to play Magic tournaments anymore or whatever, and they like sell their deck or something berserk, right? And the mindset of always improving means like, if you have a bad podcast or a thing doesn't go well, it just means we're going to work on it and iterate for the next one. I mean, it's helped the show because like we've been doing it for 400 episodes. I've been doing it for like 200 episodes. When an episode isn't good or I don't like what happened on it or I think I could have done better, I just try to do better on the next one.
You guys literally jumped on a call with me 3 weeks ago. Like I don't know how Abe was awake for what it's worth. But
you don't understand, man. My sleep schedule's bad.
I think it was Mason had this always improving moment way back in the day that really stuck with me. That's how important this segment is to me, that I remember specific things from specific people. But Mason had this story where somebody came up to him and wanted to talk to him, and he stopped them before they talked, and he said, "Are you about to tell me a bad speech story, or do you want my advice?" That is the most candid, honest type of interaction with a Magic player that I have ever heard. Regardless of what that person wanted, they knew Mason was going to listen. If that's not always improving, I don't know what is. Do you remember talking about this, Mason? Do you actually know the moment?
Part of this comes from frustration, the moment of me listening to
That's
bad
okay.
beats the whole time.
I know, but like I have actually done this with some of my best friends now. Even when I walk up to them, I'm like, "Hey, I'm in a bad mood. Can I give you a bad beat?" Just to vent, rather than just coming up and venting. It's like, I don't know what your mindset is. We're both at a Magic tournament. Well, how do you guys want to apply this moving forward? We'll jump to you, Abe.
There's not a way you can't apply it moving forward. That's how I feel about it. There's never a thing that you will encounter that you want to commit yourself to, that as long as you're deciding to, if you keep yourself humble and, approaching it with this mindset of, I just need to get better at it, and that's what my goal is to be better tomorrow than I was yesterday, to be one step closer to the top of the mountain than I was one step ago, not become complacent in your pursuit of it. That really applies to everything. That's why I say it's so timeless. That's why it's so worth this whole episode and worth every 100 episodes coming back and gushing about. You can always apply it to anything moving forward as long as all inside of your locus of control. Whatever it is that you can do to improve, if you remind yourself that that is the ultimate goal, is for you to improve at what you're doing, you can get better and you can be moving forward. That mindset and that approach, finding good processes that emphasize that and reinforce that in you, is really, really powerful.
I have pretty big plans for CC in the next 100 episodes. Seeing the feedback that we've gotten on YouTube, seeing the feedback that we've gotten from patrons since I've rejoined the show has really reinvigorated me in a lot of ways. Due to, I'll be really honest, due to like therapy, I've really recovered from my imposter syndrome when it comes to this podcast, and I have plans to up a lot of parts of the production value for this show. And I think that's part of being always improving. What about you, Mason?
It's a little hard for me to like answer this a question because it's like, where can you apply this moving forward? And it's kind of a guiding light or philosophy, as Abe said earlier. But what I can say for what the listeners could maybe expect or something along those lines, the wanting to improve the show in that aspect, wanting to improve the way we tackle and handle shows, and the amount of like levity versus seriousness versus like how condensed and concise can we get this for you is it's only going to get better with time and gets better as chemistry gets figured out more and more, which happens more and more over time.
I think that'll do it for the main topic. We're going to move into kind of our final wrap-ups, but our last couple segments, I tried to get as many of these in as I could. So I invited patrons and other people to submit Always Improving stories. That's where one of Adrian's came from. But Mikey says, I don't know if this is an Always Improving moment, but Waffle said something to chat that really resonated with me, that it's not about how many wins you get with a deck, but how the deck feels. I think this is a really great Always Improving moment. The number of times where like we'll be like 2-0 in a league and we already want to change cards. Like we already know that like cards are bad. The same thing happens in reverse though, where you're like 0-2 or 0-3 with a deck and you see the things that you did right and you know what you want to change. Practice is not the same as the tournament. I, for myself, have had a lot of 5-0 decks or 7-0 decks, depending on the client, or where I'm like, I hated this deck. I was only playing for the ticks or for the gems or the gold or whatever. And like I would change a lot of the things. And understanding that your goals going into those type of moments, I think is a huge Always Improving moment.
So you mentioned how sometimes you're like 0-2 or 0-3 in a league and you see the things you want to change. But I think more importantly, or it needs to be said at least out loud,
the things
is that
I
the things
did
you
well.
don't change. My deck is really good. I got a little unlucky in some spots. I think I could have played better. I'm not going to overcorrect for something that's not here, and I'm looking to see how things go and see how they interact. I typed this out a little bit in the Patreon-only Discord, which if you want to patron the show, you'll see these questions ahead of time. You get to ask these questions, and sometimes we answer them there as well. And a friend of mine, Jesse, actually had this moment, and we had this conversation coming back from the NRG literally last night, where she was like, I think I need to understand that the league results aren't going to correlate with tournament results, and they aren't exactly the same. Because going into Vegas, she was like, I think she said like 26-4 combo deck, whatever. I can't remember the name of the deck right now. Going to Vegas, and then she 0-3 dropped. And then going to this weekend, she was 23-2 with Blue White Hammer across leagues and just crushing it, just like crushing me in practice games too. Like I'm really trying. I can't beat her. She's unstoppable, right? She just can't lose. She plays a tournament. She goes. They missed playing for top 8 in the team event, but her day was medium, and then her day 2 with the single event, she 0-2 dropped. And it really kind of got to her at first, but she went on an actual factual hike and then kind of came back, and we talked about it in the car, and she's like, yeah, this is a huge Always Improving moment for you. Huge level up. I knew this would come up on the show eventually, so it's awesome it gets to happen the next day, but it's like, the wins don't really matter. What matters is like, okay, but like, did you win a bunch of games and then your deck was kind of misbuilt and a little clunky? Or like, did you not actually have good things, but like you drew the hammers enough where like you got to go there, you know? And those sort of things are really what matters. So looking at how the deck functions and plays, and also like thinking about like, oh wow, I got really lucky for it to break that way. It's probably not supposed to go that way if things go well. You know, for every game that you say I would have won if I had played better, you need to be honest about like, oh, I think if my opponent sequenced better there, I would have lost. And if you don't do that sort of stuff, you're going to be bad.
I have 2 thoughts on what you just said, and then I want to pitch it to you, Abe. The number one thing is I have not gotten past the point of being a tinkerer still. I think it's one of my biggest weaknesses in Magic. When I say like I 2-0 and I want to change something, like I mean that, but I mean that no matter how many games I am into a deck. One of the biggest moments on both this podcast, because the podcast covered it a lot, and what Mason just said is we had a PTQ where our entire team played the same green-red devotion deck. None of us top 8'd, and we had like an 85% win percentage across the group. We just got the bad beats. Of the decks that we prepared for, which was 10 different standard decks, we lost twice. We learned that like sometimes somebody's going to show up with some BS. You can't get tilted when the BS shows up. You just have to play your best at that time. We got lined up against like mono white knights in a format where that's not a real thing. If Magic was easy, I think it would be so much less fun.
Like winning matches is the goal in some settings. You know, when you're playing a deck to learn something, it's about what you learn, not about the wins and losses you take. All of the information you want is from inside the game. And so, you know, there are plenty of times where you can play a deck, it feels like it's functioning really well, and it loses. I feel like Blood Moon is the perfect example of a card that people often fall into the trap of getting too many wins with. If they're playing a deck that has Blood Moon in it, and they get these free wins, especially on Magic Online, where they just like jam a Blood Moon, either could be in paper too, you just play a Blood Moon and then your opponent stumbles, they weren't expecting it, and this card nets kind of this free win. And there's something to be said for free wins, especially when you're trying to win a tournament. Those free wins, you should think about how avoidable are they. If people's mana bases are just good and can afford to get basics a lot, then you're not going to get those wins at a tournament. It's not going to happen that way, and you need to like think about what's going on in there. Like there was a time where I played Splinter Twin, and I just had like Blood Moon in my Splinter Twin decks. I was like, I need more. Like it's just winning like games for like Blue Moon decks. It's got to be good. I'll just play Twin and Blue Moon as my kill condition. It was terrible. I did it for like 5 PTQs. It was awful. And I just kept on telling myself to keep doing it because Blood Moon kept on feeling like a solution to my problems when in actuality I was just like totally undoing all of the good of my deck. Evaluate whether or not what you're doing and what your deck is doing is working in the abstract. Assembling its game plan. Is that game plan good? Is so much more important to understand out of the practice you put in than am I opening some nice treasure chests at the end of my league? Because you can buy treasure chests, but you can't buy match wins.
I want to talk about like what you just said and go into our next question, which was from Adrian, which is what are your most memorable always improving stories? I think this is a great question. I already mentioned one of them, Mason's moment of like, I'm going to like set myself up for understanding where this other person is at so that I can continue. I don't want to undersell how impactful that was to me, Mason, because like I legitimately think that listening to Bad Beat stories, you have to be in the right frame of mind for, right? And if they say, I want to tell you a Bad Beat story, you get the opportunity to say, that's totally okay. I currently am not in the frame of mind to hear that. Setting yourself up for kind of traps, right? Where like, whether it's a free win card or stuff like that. I remember multiple times for me where like, I would get hung up on something, doing something that no other card could have done for me, and then just like hammering that card into the literal ground. It might have been this year where I talked about challenging my heuristics as I was coming back to Magic was like a pretty big thing, especially in things like Modern. The whole format changes every time they release a Modern Masters or Modern whatever set. Like it's a new format. And challenging your heuristics on deck building and things like that is a pretty big, always improving moment for me. The other one that I will say is one that I posted in our Discord. It was an always improving story that is so funny to look back on because I don't know that Mason or Abe know it. But I'm going to read the message that somebody sent me this week that says, may sound weird, but I still think about you when I'm filling my ice trays. Thanks for that life skill. For those who don't know, there was a long time on constructive criticism where I didn't have an ice maker in my house. I have one a foot away from me right now. And I love ice. Whether I like ice water is in front of me at work all the time. Like whatever I'm drinking, I like a lot of ice. I'm a total American. I know some of our listeners are not in America and they think I'm a weirdo, but like if it hurts my teeth, it's better. Like that's how I feel about it. I didn't have an ice maker, and it really bugged me when other people would use the ice tray and not fill it up. I will fill up the ice tray. Like if I walk into the kitchen, I will just fill up the ice tray. It's so funny that this is the message I got this week, because the guy that told us that he built his house, developing the habit of savings, was from Spencer filling the ice tray. There was another person that I'll mention because I forgot it until this moment, and I might cry. His name was Quentin James Nash. He's one of our longest patrons ever. He's not currently a patron. I don't think he plays Magic, but he is a doctor. He was delivering a baby that was born that had some stuff going wrong. And he messages us after this delivery, and he said, I'm in like having this moment where I'm delivering this baby, and I thought about what you guys said on the podcast about going back to the basics. And I went back to the basics and was able to deliver this baby successfully. I think those two, the baby story and the ice tray story, are my favorite. They're not mine. I mean, the ice tray one is, but like somebody literally fixing their finances because I filled my ice tray is like...
That's just the most... I feel like the most Magic player story of all time.
All right, I'm delivering this baby. What did Spencer and Quentin say on this week of constructive criticism is like, what just happened? Like,
under the gun, I think it might be Jesse's from yesterday, which isn't mine, but I'm starting to steal it, where it is like, we're preparing for 2 events. I mean, like, what did we say? She would have like a 60-6 record or whatever for things. Did, not great, and kind of came to the conclusion without having to be told it or whatever, and had this huge level moment. And it's so sick to see her really try and improve and push herself and all that sort of stuff in the short time I've known her. And I'm teaming with her and Bob and Cheese, and she just messaged me. She 5-0'd a league, and she was like, but I want to make these changes because I think these things are bad or whatever. And it's like, let's go.
It's the best, right? Like, when I still need to work on that. So I love that one. We're going to read this last one. I have a question. I think it's been recycled a few times, but I'm going to ask it anyways. I spent the weekend playtesting Modern to find a deck for SG Dallas. Started playing Living End after they moved off it due to its control matchup being so difficult. The question is, how do I know if a deck and its positioning is bad, or if it's because I'm a mediocre pilot? A follow-up to this would be, what is a proficiency between 0 and 100%? Mason, you already want to answer this, so I'm going to let you go.
Like, Adrian feels this sort of way, so I'm just going to set it up here. It's like, if these sort of things happen, you need to pick the deck that's best for you to do well if your goal for the tournament is to do as well as you possibly can. If your goal is to practice and work on these other things, that's cool, whatever. But it sounds like Adrian's goal is to win the tournament. And so I would pick the deck that you feel you can do best with that is a reasonable choice, which is something you've probably heard me say a lot on the show. Adrian listens to all the episodes, so I know Adrian's heard it. But reasonable deck gamers is what I say. If you got to be able to come to me, or I'm going to come to somebody and tell you my deck, I don't want anyone to be like, huh, like, what's happening? Gruul midrange in the Death Shadow world? What? Like, you need to pick a reasonable deck and pick the one that makes the most sense to do. So if you feel like, hey, I'm not a very good pilot for these reasons, and that's something you can work on and always improve in a different part of your life. Even though I'm not a big fan of having these short-term goals, it's fine to make that your goal and be like, okay, well, if that's the case, I'm going to play Murktide Regent because it's the most well-rounded generic deck. I'm not going to play it optimally, but I've got Ragavan and Counterspell, and that's going to beat some percentage of players no matter how much better they are than me.
I have two things I want to talk about. First is the Living End control matchup. If all you're trying to beat is Counterspell, you can probably figure out a way to do it, man. If control, quote-unquote, is a bad matchup, don't pack in a matchup so fast. It's possible that that's true, but then you have to ask yourself the question that we talked about, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that we kind of were talking about, like, what am I trying to beat? How am I trying to beat it? What am I trying to give up, right? That whole idea. The second thing that I want to say is, like, this proficiency level thing. At some point, you're going to need to be good at something you're bad with, and you need to make the decision to become good at that thing. At some point, midrange is going to be bad, combo is going to be bad, control is going to be bad, aggro is going to be bad, and you need to then say, well, what's next up on my plate? And if you don't do it, you'll just become that person at your F&M. That's a control player, that's an aggro player, that's a combo player. And you need to decide. Mason's not going to tell you. Abe's not going to tell you. If you think Living End is good right now, cool. Learn Living End. Mason talked about, like, being a reasonable deck person. Arena Decklist did like a 2-hour segment, it felt like, on Jerry playing the wrong deck at tournaments, trying to be the smartest person in the room. Honest, Jerry, I had a lot of success with Jeskai when you had success with Jeskai. I cashed 2 SCG events. I probably won thousands of dollars playing Magic the Gathering with your deck. So while you're saying I should have been playing whatever the heck you're talking about, I had success with it. It also is the deck that got me to bridge from mid-range into control. It is the deck that literally took me from Jund into blue-white Drago. And, like, understanding your limitations and, like, what you're good at, and then deciding what you're trying to achieve in a tournament. You're going to SCJ Dallas. The first thing that you need to do is decide, what am I trying to do? If your goal is to play your best tournament, you can pick whatever deck you want. I can't pick a deck that I'm not going to have fun with. Actually, after my first loss, will not be capable of moving forward.
First, I was popping off because Spencer reiterating the point of do not pigeonhole yourself by being afraid of learning a new thing in Magic. Especially when it's a deck like Living End, or most combo decks even, they're kind of these individual puzzles of, like, proactive thing that you're doing that's really busted but is easy to interact with on some axis, and then other people picking a way to interact with you on that axis. So understanding how to beat those patterns, or how to, like, maneuver those kinds of games, is a pretty small problem to solve in the grand scheme of, like, all things Magic you could ever encounter, right? You don't have to figure out, like, what threat suite do I play to, like, deal with the blue-white deck when I'm playing this aggro deck or whatever, So if it really just comes down to you don't like how difficult the control matchup is that because you're afraid of learning how to navigate the control matchup as Living End, or are there other things also with Living End that make you not want to play it? Because with decks that are, very very linearly proactive and have one game plan, that proficiency slider that you're imagining in your mind of like between 0 and 100, it's easier to get closer to 100 than it is with something that's very wide and varied and relies a ton on knowing every single card that your opponent could have. An old Lantern controller, like playing a Jund deck against an open field. The other thing I'll give you is a piece of wisdom that I got from my friend Jonathan Skenek many years ago on a car ride, which was you should play the deck that you feel like you'll stomach the losses with the best. If you pick a deck and you're honest with yourself, like, I'm probably going to be bad in these matchups, and when I encounter those matchups, I'm going to lose them, or they're going to be tough, and it's going to happen, and I will feel okay if I lose to these matchups, and I, encounter the others, win or lose, whatever. But I feel good about my deck choice because at the end of the day, I will have had the best time at this tournament and have given myself the best chance, or whatever motivates you for that tournament. If you feel like the only thing holding you back is the control matchup, and you feel like you don't have the time to figure it out, or you can't really understand how to get it to a point where you feel comfortable with, you could even just write off every control matchup as being something you're okay with losing because it's the thing that's not in your skill set. You just didn't have enough time to really figure it out, but you feel good about every other matchup, so you're going to play Living End. That is a great plan. You don't need to be the best Living End player in the world, or the best player of any deck in the world, to register in a tournament and have a chance at winning. That's what makes Magic so great in so many cases. If everything else about the deck feels good, then you shouldn't worry about the fact that this one weakness you're identifying in yourself means that you're not a perfect player of the deck. You should focus on all the things around that deck that are making you drawn to it. If you feel like the deck is just powerful and what you want to be doing, work on a way forward instead of trying to go somewhere else to find something better. Because it sounds like if you like the deck other than this one thing, that one thing being solved would mean you'd like the deck enough to play it at the tournament.
Darth Claymore on 3 Shortcuts to Improve at MTG says, between episodes 393, Personalized Goals, 395, Being Okay with Tough Matchups, and this episode, you guys have improved my Magic skills and my enjoyment in playing the game. Just wanted to say thanks. I wanted to say thank you to you. That comment made my month, mostly because 2 of these 3 topics were mine, so woo! Go Spencer. This is the thing that gets me up to do this podcast each day, and I just thank you. That type of feedback is my lifeblood. So if you had your comment read this week or any other week, reach out to me personally. I'm at Spencer13H, or if you want to reach out to the podcast or in Discord, wherever. And Oasis has offered to update how we do this. We might start doing promos, store credit, all kinds of stuff for these comments and questions. So if you are getting them answered, reach out. I'm going to work with Oasis to really sponsor this segment of the show. So I'm going to wrap up the show pretty quickly. I just want to say thank you to Sam Black for drafting Archetypes, Mythic Michaela for Arena Mythic Cast, and the guys over at Common Knowledge, whether it be Christian or Brad. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to give it a like, a sub, or the very best way is to get a review on whatever podcast platform you are doing so. Those likes, those subs, those comments on YouTube, Spotify, wherever it is, help the show more than you could possibly imagine. Since we started doing these YouTube comment segment, the show has grown substantially on YouTube, literally from single digits to way more than that, and continue to do those things. I've seen the reviews, I've seen the things that people are doing. It changes the show. If you don't find me, you can do it at Spencer13H. You can find me every week on CCMTG. Ooh, wow. Every other week on Arena Deck Lists and or the Need to Nerd podcast. We skipped Mythicast this week due to me studying for job interviews, but we'll be back and we're looking for Mythic guests. And we're reviewing the Labyrinth this week on Mythicast on Need to Nerd, so check that out. What about you, Abe?
People can find me at twitter.com/morenothings. They can find my blog for all of your tournament reports. If you play a Magic tournament and you want to write about it and let people know how that was, how you did, how you felt, how you #always improved, you should send me an email over treeoftalesmtg@gmail.com and get that posted. Really exciting stuff. Got articles coming out.
I really need you guys to do this. I really want to buy Tree of Tales and incorporate it into CCMTG And to make that happen, Abe needs to get some content so that I can give him a fat check and move you guys over. So
find me here each and every week. You can find me at Card Kingdom, and you can find me at sometimes on Twitch.tv, but most importantly Twitter, bigger number better person at Mason E. Clark. If my number is smaller, then I am not as good as a person, but if I'm bigger, I'm clearly better, and so I need to get a bigger number.
I love the dagger at the Dagger King Abe. Thank you everybody so much for listening, and we'll see you guys all next week with episode 401 of Constructed Criticism.